Welcome to the No Risk Sports Performance Podcast, where we discuss all things sports performance, from training to nutrition and recovery to individual and team victories on and off the field. I'm your host, Judah Boulay, owner of No Risk Sports Performance in Lincoln, Rhode Island. I'm ready to roll, so let's do this. Hello, folks. Welcome to another episode of the No Risk Sports Performance Podcast. We have Tim Vagen from Highline University in Seattle, all the way across the country. Tim is the program manager for a personal training degree program out there. He has a wealth of knowledge and experience in the strength and conditioning field, especially speed development. At some point in his career, he worked with the Atlanta Falcons as their speed performance coach when Deion Sanders was there. If anybody remembers Deion Sanders, he was one of the best cornerbacks and one of the fastest ever to play in the NFL. So, Tim, welcome to the show. Thank you very much. And I know that with your long line of credentials, I did you much disservice there. So please fill in the audience about everything else that you've been involved in, and welcome.
Well, thanks, Judah. It's great to be on. I really appreciate you having me on. And it's always fun to talk shop with people, go on and move on, because I've been in the industry for 40 years. I have pretty much done it, seen it, a little of everything, but the biggest thing I always learn is that I don't know enough. I haven't learned anything, and I constantly love to have conversations to bring this on. So just a quick, brief background on me. My first job out of college was actually in the NFL. I worked for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. People know who they are now because they're wearing Super Bowl rings. Back when I was with them, we didn't win a game for like 3 years. So a little different back in the old John McKay days and in the 80s. And so I came out of there. I think it's a great thing for your career to have your first job on your resume listed as an NFL strength and conditioning coach. They hired me. I was an intern, and I tell all my students this all the time: just be the best you can be at anything you do, because you never know what's going to happen. So I was a good student. Got asked to intern with the Buccaneers. I was a good intern. They hired me. Started and launched a career. That's a pretty solid thing to have on your resume when you're looking for other jobs. So I spent some time with the Buccaneers. I spent some time with the Atlanta Falcons. I've worked independently. I've spent some time also working extensively, actually, in rehab scenarios, working with post-rehab people in my own fitness, and then worked in physical therapy clinics. My main thing was starting off with the San Francisco Spine Institute back in the 80s. And again, said earlier in our conversation before we get live that I'm pretty old. So I've been around for a while. So when I talk about things and I talk about the 70s and the 80s, it's because, I experienced those. But San Francisco Spine Institute was kind of fun. We learned all about exercise and back injuries. And the fun thing about that is I actually got to create an exercise that stabilized the spine and went through. And a lot of people know it as the dead bug. And nobody had ever seen it before. And I started doing an exercise with movement that I associated with crawling. And I said, well, a lot of people can't crawl because of their back injuries, but we can lay them down on their back and lay them down on the table or in bed, and they can move their arms and their legs. And somebody said, that looks like a dead bug. And that's exactly how it came up. So I think I can officially say I get credited for creating the dead bug exercise. That was in 1987. So it was a while back. But then I had my own gym after that. I moved to Seattle and started a gym. And it was a hospital-based gym, but also working from the outside as well. I picked up a lot of kids, a lot of sports teams, because of my background as a speed development coach. I ended up picking up a lot of youth athletes to go through that. So they came into my facility and we worked, but then you pick up a kid, he comes in and works with you, then he goes back to practice and suddenly he's the fastest kid on the team. The coach calls you and says, what did you do to this kid? Why is he so fast? Why is he outrunning all my other kids? And then all of a sudden you're working with the team. And then the team's faster than everybody else, and you're working with the league. And so it branches, and then their brother and sister play on a soccer team or something else. And then it branches out. So I started doing camps, and I ran speed camps for a number of years. They were called the Go Fast Speed Training Camp. And Go Fast was an acronym, stood for Game Oriented Footwork and Speed Training. And so it was Go Fast, and the kids learned the fundamentals and the basics. It wasn't, do the fancy dance and the ladder. It was learn how to make your body move efficiently. So we ran that for a number of years and did that while I was running my gym, had a few employees, and then built things in, and then started to realize that I had amassed a fair amount of knowledge over the years, and I better start teaching it before I forget it. So I want to share this knowledge. So I started speaking, going around the country, going around the world. Over the years, I've worked with 5 different Olympic committees from different countries. So I try to teach some of the information that I got, because the human body is the human body. And when you're doing stuff across multiple sports, it's worked well. If you want to put in some accolades there, my athletes, I've had 17 of my athletes win Olympic medals across 7 different sports. So I've kind of been there, done it, but I like to share it because that's just some experience that if people haven't gotten there, I can give them an insight to what it's like, and then I can pick up some information. So that's kind of me in a nutshell, and trying to share that information. I got into full-time teaching and started running and created and running this program.
That's awesome. The dead bug. I first learned about that. And so back in the early days, so like I got involved with CrossFit back in 2008. And then in 2009, I did a CrossFit football cert. John Wellborn, who was a former NFL lineman, he was also kind of into CrossFit, but he wanted to tailor CrossFit to power athletes. So I did the CrossFit football cert, and he had Rafael Ruiz. I don't know if you know who Rafael Ruiz is. He's got I forgot the company name because it's changed, but he made us do the dead bugs down at the cert, and it was my first experience with them. And oh my God, like when you do those correctly, there's nothing better to torch your core. And when I try to do those with some of my athletes, and it's amazing how the inability to keep the quad flexed and the straight up and to do them properly, like kids have these days. I love the exercise though. So a couple of things from that. So you've done a lot, and you've worked with a various bunch of different age groups. So you've worked with kids, you've worked with high-level athletes, and then you've also worked in this post-rehab setting with, I'm assuming, older individuals, as well as probably younger individuals. You've worked with this big range of ages and physical abilities. What's the commonalities that you've seen, no matter what group you've worked with? Like just in terms of, I guess, performance. And, for some, performance is just being able to get out of bed after a surgery, right? What's some of the commonalities you've seen in all your years of experience with all these different various groups?
I think coming down to it, and just to sort of add to the intro, I also have a master's degree in geriatric kinesiology. So working with older people is something that I later, as I became one of those geriatrics, I decided, I might as well get in. It's my constant thirst for learning that I was in the industry for 35 years and decided to get another master's degree. So it was always trying to learn. But commonality, what I found is the human body is the human body. And basics of movement. I don't care whether you're a kid, whether you're a 75-year-old lady, a 30-year-old professional athlete, your body still moves the same. There's all different levels of how you interpret those moves and how easily you're able to. The resiliency of a kid compared to a 75-year-old lady is quite a bit different. But the way they walk, the way they move, the way they squat, the way they bend is all the same. And I think the commonality is if you stick to basic movement patterns with anybody, you're going to succeed.
Okay, that's awesome. Definitely. I same wavelength. I've does like the 7 primal movement patterns, and then Lee has the 7 performance patterns. Lee Taft, that is. So going with that, I don't know how recently you've worked with youth athletes. But in your years of working with youth athletes and doing these things for speed development, like what differences did you see when you first started? And then like over the years, what changes have you seen in terms of abilities or inabilities when you work with athletes?
I think the biggest thing that I probably, going on the first question, kind of changes that were going on. Like I said, I'm a simpleton. I like simple. I like basic. And when I stress the basics, I get the most results. So movement patterns, what I found was they were easier to implement years ago when I first started working with kids because, kids still played. They still went out in the yard. They climbed trees. They did all that stuff that we did as kids, and they didn't specialize in anything. And then later on, as we got to working with kids, and even just a couple of years ago, I still continue to do some consulting work and work with teams. But kids get so specialized in what they're doing and get hung up in all the fancy stuff, the flash, all the things that market and sell in the world of speed development. And they get hung in that they forget how to move. Kids used to know how to move, and then we would just train them a little bit better and tie them into that movement and get them better on the field, the court, or whatever it happened to be. Now you're getting kids that are so caught up in the flash or so caught up in specialty movements for their particular sport that they forget how to basically move. You ask a kid to do a simple movement and they can't do it anymore. So what happens is when you're trying to teach them, you have to get that buy-in, that you have to go back to basic movements. And a lot of times the buy-in, of course, comes from the ones who are buying, the parents with the check, and they're the ones that are paying you, and they don't want to see your kid learning how to walk first. What are you doing? You're supposed to be some NFL speed coach. Why are you teaching my kid how to walk? Because he doesn't know how. So we're going to walk, then we're going to run, then we're going to get into the movement pattern. But right now, your kid doesn't know how to move. You're going to have a little bit of trust in here, but wait till you see what happens when they start to learn how to move. And the kids just start to excel. But that's been the biggest challenge is when you work with kids now, they're so sports specialized and so much in the flash of movement that they don't know how to move basically. And that's been the biggest challenge.
Okay. How about, so with that, one of the other, so with this generation, right? So they're used to seeing tons of stuff on Instagram. Kids younger and younger have cell phones and they have social media accounts and they, see the stuff on Instagram. And they'll see a lot of flash and, shock and awe on Instagram from different coaches of like the drills, right? What thoughts on that? Like, so how do you combat that to show that like simple's better?
I think a lot of times, I know when I hit my gym, when I was marketing to different parents or teams, and I would tell them straight up that I take care of basics first. I compare stories of like people like Michael Jordan, Steph Curry, even now to bring it in there. They don't realize how much they work on the basics before they can be as fancy as they can. And then what I would do is at any given time during the middle of the day, my gym was full of 5, 6 different Olympic athletes that would come in. And I would invite them to come in and see the workouts. And they were frankly kind of bored because they saw basic and simple structured workouts, because I'm not going to try to do this whole sport specific thing because if I'm working with an Olympic swimmer or I'm working with, an Olympic field hockey player or something like that, I don't know enough about swimming and field hockey that I'm going to be able to do that. I trained a kid through 6 U.S. figure skating national championships in a row. And I can't skate. I had no idea, but I learned the difference between a triple lutz and a toe loop. And suddenly I was the expert because I trained this kid in how the body was supposed to move. And all of a sudden he was injury free and able to work. So going through that, I would invite these people in to see. They wanted to see fancy workouts that I was doing with Olympic gold medalists. And they would find that they were very basic. And then I would have the Olympians talk to them and the kids and say, yeah, basics are everything. And that really helped me sell the basics and get away from everything that a kid can see on social media and the internet as far as what things are. In order to do those fancy drills, that's great, but you have to be able to have balance, control, proper core control, proper mental aspect of what you do. You can't just fly through these things.
Correct. You're right. Definitely. So going with the skating, how does taking a figure skater, right, and teaching them proper run mechanics, how does that translate into making them better at figure skating?
Yeah, what it does, it teaches them a little bit more control from their body. This kid that I started working with has had, because of poor training, has had 2 levels of pars fractures in his lower spine. For those of you listening that don't know what the pars is, it's a joint in the lower spine where the 2 vertebrae meet, and it usually comes from lack of core control and hyperextension. In figure skating, there's a lot of hyperextension, same thing in gymnastics, etc. So this kid had 2 levels of pars fractures, and he was sent to me after physical therapy to work on his core control. So we started working on core control from the basics and then built it into movement. And we started teaching running mechanics because a skater pushes out to the side when they skate. They don't work straight in and linear. So for him to learn how to control everything linear made it a lot easier for his lateral motion in skating. And therefore, he learned to control his pelvis. He learned to control his upper body in conjunction with his pelvis and his leg movements. And we tied all that in together. We taught him how to jump with 2 legs. They jump on one leg, primarily the right leg. They spin off that leg. They jump off of that leg. So part of his fractures in his spine were a complete asymmetrical balance of his body as he was trying to do it. Skaters are very asymmetrical athletes. So in order to get him to run and balance and move in a straight line was really challenging from the asymmetry. Then when we fixed the asymmetry, all of his lateral motion, his spin, his rotational, all of that came into play really easy.
So going with that, so how if somebody is a skater, hockey player, or a figure skater, right, and they're listening and they don't want to go to a strength coach or a speed coach, right, and they want to do it on their own, I'm all about, and I know there's no quick fixes, but like I'm about, once again, simple, right? So what are your top 3 drills for somebody who spends most of their time on skates to fix the imbalances that comes with skating, to help them walk or run, which is going to then make them better at skating?
It starts off with training a little bit more on the non-dominant side. Hockey players tend to go both directions a little bit more, where figure skaters, because of the nature of the moves, the spins, the jumps that they do, they primarily take off on the one leg, land on the same leg, spin in the same direction. So what we do is spend a lot of time working the opposite to bring up the balance. Get rid of the asymmetry first, and then we'll go into some basic speed movement. Or speed development. I'm not a big fan of ladders and things that people will call speed ladders. Well, they're footwork ladders, But what I would actually do is for an asymmetric athlete, I would have them go through a speed ladder and do a variety of simple drills through that to let them realize how asymmetrical they were, both in movement and strength. Once we built that, then we built a little bit of speed, spent a lot of time doing resisted motion, linear, lateral, but all directly in line, not really working a whole lot of transverse plane stuff. That's what they do all the time. So we spent straight on sagittal plane, straight on frontal plane, and then of course that the transverse plane is frontal plus sagittal. So if you can't master your sagittal plane exercise, you can't master your frontal plane, you have no right to try to master a transverse plane exercise.
Cool. So going with that, I'm trying to formulate the question in my head. But if you had, once again, like going with that, like if you have a hockey player or a skater, somebody on ice, right? And you want to fix that imbalance, right? So seems like you want to work on balance on both sides and coordination on both sides and with the weaker side. So something like a single leg deadlift, which like hits all those, would that be a tool in your arsenal to like, as like one of those, like, hey, when you go home, do this?
Absolutely. I think doing anything single leg balance, trying to work on both sides of it, you get almost any skater that a right-handed hockey player that's primarily on the right and not backhanding stuff, that left foot forward, right foot back, set up for a pass or a shot, creates a certain level in their body. Have them go home and practice those on a regular basis. Even with my NFL guys, I used to have them, if you're going to go into a room, you're walking through your house. I know your house is big. It's probably 11,000 square feet because you just made a couple $1 million, but you're going to a different room in the house. What I want you to do is I want you to turn into that room on a right angle. And what I want you to do is I want you to plant the inside edge of your foot and step into that room at a right angle. Do that all day long. When you're going to the left, I want you to do the opposite so we can balance you out. So here with an athlete that is asymmetrical and going through that, we would teach them to treat both sides at home exactly like they would. And I would give them small things: brush your teeth, stand on one foot when you're brushing your teeth, changing rooms, plant that foot and turn at a 90-degree angle. All of a sudden, that becomes habitual. And our whole thing in good movement patterns and good movement that we want to do is create habitual patterns. We don't want them to have to think. When you start getting into reactive tiers of training that you get with Lee Cap stuff, that's because you've trained that responsiveness so much that it becomes reactive and natural. And so the more we can do that with them, the better. And that's what I would tell them to do. Do as much as you can on that opposite thing. I teach the kids for better balance and coordination, asymmetrical stuff. I would tell them everything you do with your right hand when you're home, you're eating, you're writing, you're doing it. I want you to try to do it with your left hand. Teach yourself to be ambidextrous. And they would create not only physically the right way to do that, but it would start getting some neuroplasticity going on in their head to start training how things work on both sides. If we could teach them to be ambidextrous, then it balances out a lot of those asymmetries.
Definitely. Yeah, it's funny because like my son's right-footed dominant, and he had a soccer game yesterday, and he had a clear shot on goal, but instead he shifted his body to pass with his right instead of going for the goal with his left. And like middle of the game, I called him out and like I screamed on the field at him because I called him out because I'm constantly on him. Because it's more about the movement, because it's you need to work on developing the left, and you can't always go to your strong side if you want to be a balanced athlete. And if for me, it was like the sports performance coach. I don't care if you scored or not. I would have cared if he at least kicked it with his left leg, no matter what, because it shows that you're a balanced athlete. And it, and it's just shows that like that he's not, right. So that's a flaw and something that like, movement wise, regardless of sport, like he needs to work on. Right. And I try to, I work with all my athletes, the non-dominant side, because it's funny, like a lot of people, if they're right-handed, if you have them do just a med ball shot put throw with their weak side, like it's not a push, it's like a big swing. And like they don't have the control or the movement control to actually do a push. And so it's just, the importance of balance, right? Especially now, like, baseball players, kids are playing baseball and they're specializing. And if they're right-handed, it's just like right side dominant. And like the left side is so far weaker. And that just leads to injuries down the road. So
I actually, just to further that, I used to use that as marketing. One of my favorite stories working with a kid, when you bring up soccer, it made me think about this, is I had, she was probably 14, 15 years old, fairly high level for that age. And I always preface that. I don't say she's an elite level soccer player because she was 15. But she had been working speed training with me for a long time, and she learned movement patterns, and she knew what proper foot placement was. She learned what proper balance, center of gravity control, all of that. And I said, okay, you know this now. You know this stuff so well you could teach it. We've got a tournament this weekend. What I want you to do is, you're a striker. I want you to go up and I want you to take your defender, take them to their right, and try to go by them, see what happens. Next time you get the ball, take them to their left, see what happens. I want you to recognize what happens. She took them to the right, she got stuck. Took them to the left, she blew by, scored a goal. Next time came by and said, I'm going to the right. Took her to the right, got stuck again, went to the left, got another shot off. Finally, she turned to the defender and said, when you go back to your left side, you plant your left heel going backwards. That's not a good thing. No wonder you can't stop. So she knew exactly what was going on. She said, on the right side, you stay on the balls of your feet and you move. But when you go to your left, you drop your left heel and it puts you in a bad position and you have to regain your balance and you lose me. So next time she got the ball and she smiled at her and said, I'm going to your left again. And the girl, totally in her head, didn't know what to do, but could not control her because it was not an innate movement. So when I tell kids that, and I tell parents that, coaches that, I said, I can teach you to recognize these things, not only to improve your movement, but to exploit the movement of your opponents who don't have training.
Right. Interesting. So how would you handle? So we're feeling this right now too, is that, as a parent, I'm seeing the other side and the pressure that's put on parents to like have their kids, if they're any bit decent at a sport, to specialize and sign up with these elite level clubs. And so our parents like looking at it and they realize that their kid naturally might be just better than everybody in the regular rec league. And so their kid's bored with the level of competition in the rec league, but then they're being forced to specialize at a higher, at the next level at a much earlier age, maybe than, they would want to. What would your advice be to parents, when they're faced with something like that?
That was really tough because the way youth athletics has moved on now, there's a social stigma when you only play rec soccer. When you're going to school, oh, you're on the recreational team. You're not on the traveling club that plays all over the country, and you're not on this. There is a lot of pressure there. But I'm a huge advocate of being a multi-sport athlete as a kid. I think it's highly important that I use examples of most of the professional athletes that I've worked with over the years, that I talked to the parents and say, look, these were all multi-sport people. Now, in their defense, they said, yeah, well, you worked with these people in, the 70s, 80s, 90s. Everybody played multiple sports, but nobody does that now. So how do you do that? And I think that's one of the biggest challenges, because they start getting so specialized that you don't know how to do it. I had an 11-year-old kid come to me and I said, so what sport do you play? And he said, I'm a left outside midfielder in soccer. And I said, but you're 11. Yeah, I'm a left outside. I said, did you ever play like right wing? Or did you ever play defender? How are you in goalkeeping? Oh, I'm not a goalie. Have you ever tried it? Well, no, I'm not a goalie, so I don't do it. I said, you might be the best goalkeeper in the world, and you don't know it because you haven't tried it. I said, I know you're a great soccer player. Have you ever tried basketball? Have you ever tried playing baseball? You might be an Olympic athlete in another sport, and you don't know it because you're stuck in there. And I kind of take that approach. It sounds kind of silly, and it's hard to press the parents on that, but I don't know how it is back in Rhode Island, but here, I actually coached a high-level U16 girls soccer team, and we did well enough to make it all the way to the national finals. We had a really solid team. Well, the national finals, we selected our team in March. We played all the way through the summer in tournaments. So we played our league in the fall. Then we played winter tournaments a little bit. And it carried on that the national championships were in June of the following year. So it was basically about 15 months. So in March, we had tryouts. And there were kids that didn't make it through tryouts because new kids came in and beat them out, that were still playing on the team that was going to play for the national championship. Because it was a 15-month season. And these kids never got a chance to take a break, take a rest, develop their bodies in other ways by playing other sports. And it just became so specialized. I think it's one of the biggest problems in youth sports today is we all know anybody that works with youth. You come in and say, oh, what do you like to do? I'm a soccer player. I'm a shortstop in baseball. And they're so specialized down to the position that I've had young kids, baseball players, come in and tell me what their pitch counts are. And I think it's crazy. And I don't really have a definitive answer for that because it's hard to tell. I make suggestions and I talk about, how specialized you can get, but how open you can make things happen by breaking it up a little bit and taking breaks and doing other sports.
Right. Yeah, it's a challenge, and that's the pressure, like where I'm feeling as a parent, and I'm in the field, so I can only imagine, like, and my knowledge is, I agree with you entirely, like I want my kids to play more than one sport, because it's good for their mental well-being as well as their physical well-being, and and they also like training, and I don't want them to burn out and fall out of love with the sports that they love right now. Like they're so innocent, and I love that innocence. And I hate to see the love of a sport go away from burnout. And I can imagine what other parents feel like, like without the knowledge base that I have, because if I'm feeling it with the knowledge base I have. All right. So moving forward, I don't know how much more time you have. I know you're really busy with the program, but
I blocked out a lot of time for you. Right. Take whatever time.
Cool. All right. I have a couple more questions. So then, so just because, I think it's interesting because you've worked with some really high level athletes. So when you're at, your first, whether it was the Buccaneers or the Atlanta Falcons, because with the Falcons, you had Deion Sanders, on the team, who was, like we said, one of the premier cornerbacks of all time.
The premier athletes of all
one of the
time.
premier athletes of all time. But then you also had those who were not as talented as he was. All right. You're just blessed with the genetic ability that he had. So how do you tackle a situation amongst high level performers all together, right? Where there's definitely attitude, right? Their own personal egos. And I guess you can say that's the same thing, because the atmosphere there can just be translated down to the college level with, athletes, or even to a club team with their athletes, where there's always going to be somebody slightly more talented or gifted than you. How do you balance the egos or the psychological with the physical training? So that way the elite athlete, and maybe it's a little bit different at the professional level because that's their job, and their job is to train, right? So at the college athlete, the high school athlete, the club athlete, how do you balance that ego with the physical, saying, yes, you might be good now, but you could still get better by training?
I think the important thing is good, solid communication with the athlete. I think letting the athlete understand, not really telling them. I'm all about empowering and giving people the knowledge to kind of let them figure out things themselves. I never tell an athlete what to do. I always work with them on something to do. So part of that is sitting down and having that conversation about, what do you think your weaker areas are? I'm not going to, I can test you and I can tell you what your weak areas are, but there are your athletes that have a slow 40 and they think it's one of their best, their speed is their best attribute. But to sit down and empower the higher level ones, because usually the ones that are gifted, like the Dion's or the kid on the club team that's just better, they do have an understanding of what they need to work on. And usually I have them bring that up more so than me. Where do you think you could get stronger? Your skills are really good. The way I like to give cues and coaching, and it's the same thing with anything, with raising kids. I call it kind of the sandwich approach. You hit them up with something really good. You do this really, really well. And then you fill in the meat on the sandwich. This is what we really need to work on. And then you finish it up with another slice of bread, which is another nice piece of, this is what you do really well. This is what we need to work on. And then the final slice of bread is, if you work on that stuff, look at how good that's going to be. Now, a college athlete, especially in a major sport, you can always motivate them with dollar signs. If you work on this, they're going to add another zero to your paycheck. If you work on this, professional athlete, you work on this, you're going to be all pro. You're going to be named to the all-star team. You're going to be something if you're working on this. What areas do you think? Usually the higher level the athlete that I find, the more they have a better understanding of what they need to work on. The medium level athlete who is pretty good just thinks they're good at everything. Take a look at, you're dealing with people in business, you're dealing with people in training. The mid-level trainers are the ones that think they know it all. The highest level trainers are the ones that say, I don't know anything and I need to learn more. And yes, I do this really well, but this is what I really need to work on. That's why they're at the top level.
How about with the club team, though? Because I'm sure there's all various levels of girls on that team. How do you motivate the girls who think they're really good, but they're not as good as they think?
Don't let them talk to their parents. How's that? Don't let them talk to their parents, because their parents are already counting the scholarship offers. The parents are already talking about, my 11-year-old kid that's going to be a professional athlete. I had a parent call me about a baseball player and said, well, he's projected to be a high level major league draft choice. And I said, okay, great. I can work with him. I, do a lot with shoulders, pretty healthy. Yes, he's healthy. All right, well, let's see what we can do to get him in. What's your timing look like? Well, he plays on 2 different teams. He's got a hitting coach. He's got an infielder coach. And I said, well, what about leagues? Can I go out and watch some of his leagues and play like maybe in the New England League or something like that? And she said, no. I said, all right, well, can you bring him in during the day then? Because he's usually practicing in the afternoon, evenings. Well, he's got school. Wait a minute. How old's your son? Oh, he's 9. He's going to be the next Derek Jeter is what his coaches are telling me. So I want to give him everything I can. Now, this is a kid that's told he's the next Derek Jeter. He's going to be a high-level draft in Major League Baseball draft, where his parents have a better chance of winning the lottery 3 times than this kid getting drafted. And the kid is told that in the old adage that something that comes out of his body doesn't stink. And these are the toughest kids to work with because they are told they are the best of the best. And if you mention that they may have a flaw, the parents are the ones that go nuts because you said their kid wasn't perfect. That to me has always been the hardest thing. So when you deal with a kid like that, what I use my experience in recognizing movement skills, and I will have them do a drill that I know they will not be able to do. Mm-hmm. It's a kind of a harsh way of doing it, but I'll expose them. From a business side, they always talk about your elevator statement. My elevator statement always was, I find physical weaknesses in people and I exploit them. And then I walk off the elevator. People want to know, what do you do? Well, I find physical weaknesses in people and I exploit them. That's what I do as a movement coach, as a strength coach. And so these kids that, think they're perfect, or the parents, I should say, that think they're perfect, you expose them. You find a weakness in their movement and have them do it. And they get frustrated. And you say, you know what? I can teach you how to do that movement. This is how you need to do that. And it humbles them, brings them down, and then all of a sudden they start doing that movement. And now it's magic. And you created that bond with them because you found somebody that was perfect and you found a slight flaw, but you fixed that flaw. Now you've got that kid for life. I've got some of these kids that were 10, 11, 12 years old. They're 30 years old now and I'm still in contact with them.
Wow.
Because I made a difference in their life.
Right. That's awesome. So I love that statement about your elevator pitch. That's I think that's something that like every strength coach needs to like put on. Well, hopefully not everyone, but I might use that. Because that's fantastic. Because that's exactly what, that's basically like how like we fix strength coaches, speed coaches, like we fix movement. Right. And
right.
Like the kids who get their movement fixed are always going to be better off than the kids who don't get their movement fixed. And from a coaching standpoint, when I'm looking, I coach rugby, and when I'm looking at the field, I look at body position and, body position of like the opposing team. And that's how I know how to coach my individual players when I have a moment to talk to them about where to attack on the playing field, or, going into a tackle or whatnot, and I do that in practice, and so, but it's basically, what coaching is, I think smart coaching. All right. So before I hit my final questions that I ask every guest, so you've had great experiences, a lot of like life, real cool experiences, some experiences that none of us will ever be in the situation experience in terms of, the athletes that you've worked with, the teams that you've worked with, and all those years of working with NFL teams or athletes. Are there any what are some of what's like a most memorable experience you've had? And then what's one of the most humorous anecdotal experiences that you've had working with these teams?
All right. So tap into, first one was what? One of
The most memorable, one of the ones that like stands out in your memory the most from working with all these high level athletes and teams was like, if you had to pick, and I'm sure it's probably difficult, but if you had to pick the most memorable, what would be the most memorable? And then what's the most humorous or anecdotal?
I think from a memorable, what I remember the most and a memorable event was the first time I had an athlete in an individual sport break a world record. I mean, I didn't look at it as, wow, they won a competition. Wow, they set a world record. Okay, good. I looked at it and I talked to her, and this was a swimmer, and she got out of the pool, and I gave her a hug and said, congratulations, nice work. And she was, I broke the world record. I said, no, you didn't break the world record. You are now the fastest person in the history of the human being that has ever done your distance in that time. And that's the way I looked at it. Well, yeah, world record, those are words. I said, you are the fastest human being ever in the history of humans that have done this. I mean, granted, they didn't time Tarzan when he was getting chased by an alligator or something, but in a competition, you've done this faster than anyone else in the history of the world. And I kept mentioning that, and it blew her away when she thought about that. World record is great. That means, oh yeah, I went the fastest time. No, fastest time ever. How many thousands, if not millions of people have swam this distance for time? And nobody has ever done this at this level. You're in a very, very unique category of people. And that was a pretty amazing moment. I can remember that. I mean, aside from my get on the bragging thing, aside from my daughter winning a world championship, it was that was probably an amazing moment. And so that was probably the most memorable. That first world record. I've had several since then, but they never meant the same because that was the first one. Kind of like your first love. Always, you never forget your first love, no matter who it was. You always remember. Now, unfortunately, you hook up with them on Facebook and you find out, oh my God, I escaped this one. But
before we get onto the humorous one, just to follow up on that. So, like, how is it after for that athlete? They win the world record, right? They're the fastest human in that distance at that, in humanity. What's next for them, right? So, like, how do they, is there like a big low afterwards? Because like they hit this high and then like, is there a low? Like, where do I go from here? Or how do you coach somebody through that?
Yeah, I think the low, there's a real actually high level of depression and mental issues from world champions, world record holders, etc. Because now you have done something that nobody else has done before. What's your goal?
Right.
You've just beaten the ultimate goal. You've gone faster than anybody else in the history of the world. Now what do? Well, you go down to the tattoo shop and you put a big target on your back. Because that's all you become now is no matter what you're doing, whether it's a local race away from the Olympic pool or whether it is something really just in practice and somebody holds their own against you. Well, you feel defeated. They feel elated. So you have the target on you that expectations have always been high for you because you're an elite level athlete. Now that you're a world record holder, the expectations are even higher and will be there for the rest of your life. You could be retired for 20 years and go to a master swim event, and they're going to say, this is world record holder so-and-so. That's how you become known, and you lose a little bit of your personal identity. So you have to deal with the mental aspects of it.
Interesting. All right. And then going back with the humorous or anecdotal story from your time working with professional athletes, world record holders and teams, do you have a favorite anecdotal humorous moment?
Yes, actually. And it really doesn't have to do with a specific athlete, but it has to do with training. I went and got invited over to spend some time in Istanbul to train in different things at the Turkish Olympic Center, and I was shocked that they didn't know what a Turkish get-up was. I asked them if as we go through this, are we going to do Turkish get-up? And it's like, Coach, what is Turkish get-up? So I showed them, I grabbed a kettlebell, I showed them a Turkish get-up, and they were just shocked. And they said, oh, we'll start calling these American get-ups. So that was, from a humorous side, that was great. And I love telling that story because here I was spending time with elite level athletes in Turkey, and they didn't know what a Turkish get-up was. They'd never heard of it.
Had they seen the movement before, or like you just didn't know by that name?
They never knew it was called a Turkish get-up.
Okay, cool.
And they're like, we don't do these in Turkey. This is okay. I understand this lift, and there were some people that were into kettlebells that would do that movement, but the regular athletes, I worked with team handball, soccer, swimming. They would never do a supplementary exercise like that. So we started building that up, and it made a difference.
That's awesome. All right, and then so one more just before I have my favorite, but you were sharing a story. I think everybody would find some amusement with it, but there was a little incident, not an incident, but a moment with the Atlanta Falcons that was also from a long-term career development or franchise development blunder that was made. Please share that one that we were talking about earlier.
Absolutely. Well, it happens in all sports. People make trades, they go through things. Well, we had a third string quarterback. Chris Chandler was our quarterback at the time, and we had a third string quarterback that nobody really cared for because he wasn't the nicest guy. He was arrogant, thought everything about him, just like these kids that we talk about that were the perfect kids. This guy came in and just thought he was, God's gift to football as he went through. And nobody liked him, and he barely got any playing time. I think he probably got 3 or 4 reps during the season and was sitting on the bench, trash talking everybody the whole time. So they decided to get rid of him. And then when the Green Bay Packers picked up Brett Favre after we cut him, I think we need to stop the story there because he turned out okay.
Yeah, he did. Yeah. One of the all-time greats. I know, not personality-wise, but from a playing standpoint.
From a football standpoint, yeah, absolutely. I mean, from a personality standpoint, and this probably goes all over the internet, I'd probably get in trouble for it, but look what they replaced him with personality-wise. Maybe not the best
right.
with Aaron. Maybe not the most popular guy, but you've got to respect his talent.
Right.
Absolutely. And I think that's the key, is respecting that talent of what it is, whether they're, perfect personalities, nicest people to get along with. That was the difference with somebody like Dion. He stepped into the huddle, was really hard on everybody because he wanted them to be better. And he made everybody about 10 to 15% better every time he stepped on the field.
There's something to be said about that.
Yeah.
So, all right. So the questions I ask every guest, do you have a favorite quote that you always resort to, whether it's like just for your own personal mantra or that you always like just use the same quote with your athletes, that always just resonates with you?
Absolutely. And almost everybody that knows me hears this from me all the time. You don't know what you don't know. and, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I consult the different gyms in the area I'm training and go through, and I've talked to gym owners and they think their trainers are the best trainers in the world. And I said, guess what? You don't know what you don't know. Let me expose you to some high level training and let you see what actual really good training is. Or somebody, you could do it in the business world when you're working on that. People think, yeah, we've got good systems. Well, you don't know what you don't know. And then all of a sudden you see really good systems that are better than yours. And it ties into the constant thirst for learning.
Perfect. And
that's my favorite quote. From a personal side, I have a quote that says, nobody can hurt you without your permission. But that is all about how you personally react and respond to things from a personal side and your emotional side. That's my other favorite one. But from a training side of things, you don't know what you don't know. It's probably the biggest one that I use all the time.
And that is a great segue into my next question, which I ask everybody, because I'm a big firm believer in reading. I love books, and I think reading gives you knowledge, and knowledge gives you power, and that goes along with you don't know what you don't know. Do you have a favorite book? Like if you had to recommend one book to somebody, and it could be in whatever discipline it is, but if you had to recommend one book, what book would that be?
Because as said earlier, I'm a simpleton and I like the basics. I like the classics as well, and the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People is a book that I make all of my students read, because what you'll learn is that based on your own specific behavior and how you do things as far as a habit is concerned, when you learn about the 7 habits of highly successful people, there was a lot of research that went into that to realize that people who are very successful tend to do the same thing.
Excellent. Okay. The last question is, what are Tim Vagen's 3 keys to success?
Oh man. Number 1, communication. Now, I don't mean just communication with your athletes, with your coaches, with any. Communication is really something that most people don't talk about, that it's communication with yourself as well. It's going back to the you don't know what you don't know, 7 habits, all those things that tie into these questions. That honest communication with yourself is so important to be successful, because you have to realize, we talked about this a little bit, that we're not all perfect. There are areas that we're weak in. And if you can't communicate that with yourself, then you are not going to be successful. And because if you can communicate with yourself, your ability to communicate with other people is going to be that much higher. My girlfriend's a flight attendant, and the old put your oxygen mask on first before you can help people. Well, there's a reason for that, because if you're choked out because you can't save your family. So you have to have that communication within yourself and be honest with yourself and be able to deal with that before you can ever think about dealing with other people. So I think communication is my number 1 thing. Again, we talked about it. You heard it come out. Basics. Know the basics. And that, I don't care what it is, whether it's training, whether it's speed development, whether it's weightlifting, whether it's business. If you can't do things from the basics the way they're meant to be done, you're not going to be able to do anything. So basics are huge. So we go from communication with yourself and others to basics with yourself and others and mastering those, to being able to understand people. maybe that goes in through the two things, but as we know, we're coaches. And if you're a really good coach, you are essentially a chameleon. You're going to change. You're going to get one kid that you know that you're working with that you're going to have to feel tougher on, but you know that the other kid that's behind him, if you get tough on him, he's going to fold up and crawl into the corner and maybe never come back. So you've got to be a little bit more supportive with him. If you're too supportive with the one kid, then you're just, stroking his ego, and you have to be tough on him. Not supportive enough with another kid, then you're demoralizing him, and you're not bringing that up. So I think the ability to adapt is probably the words I'm looking for. So good communication, being able to do basics, and within all of those, still be able to adapt and still be able to adapt task at hand, whether it is a podcast, whether it's training, whether it's a relationship. You have to be adaptable and understand within that communication to yourself, going back and tying it all through, that being adaptable is okay. You can teach something 3 or 4 different ways because there's 3 or 4 different people who are going to understand it a little bit different. So those are 3 key, I think, components to, as I think about it, when you sent me that email and said, okay, think about that question. I really think that those 3 components have really helped me a lot.
Cool. No, those are awesome. That's, the funny thing is, from every podcast, I look at these as like trying to get information out to people from different perspectives, but I learned so much and from each of these, and like, everybody I interview, it just makes me just think so much more about me as a coach and me as a person, and where I can improve and what I'm maybe doing right, because I know there's things I could be doing better, and I think there's some things that I'm doing pretty good. So last question, we've talked about a lot. We've shared a lot. Was there something that you had hoped I would have asked you that I didn't ask you? And if you were in my seat?
Actually, it's something that you didn't ask me that I think is very important. And it's important that you didn't ask me. That's the thing. It's not that I wish you had asked me, but you didn't. And I'm really proud of you for not doing that. And that was really cool. Is one of the things that I have been asked over the years, and you probably get it as well as a coach, is people want to know, well, what was your background in sports? What did you do? Did you play professionally? I was a 21-year-old kid working in the NFL. And did I have time to pursue an athletic career? I actually did, but I think it's such an important question, because a lot of times, and it goes a lot with the flash of speed training. Typically the ones who are teaching the flash training are the ones that had exceptional careers, and they market on their notoriety of their careers and not their knowledge. You asked me nothing but questions about my knowledge, my background, my coaching, my philosophies, and all that. I was a 3-time world champion athlete.
Wow.
But you didn't ask that, and that's great. You didn't ask, oh, what's your athletic background that makes you a good coach? No, I'm a good coach because I'm a good coach.
Right.
I'm not a good coach because I was a good athlete. My sport was rowing. My daughter took it up. When you talk about kids specializing, I know we're trying to cut this out, but she was a swimmer in high school, highly recruited swimmer, did very, very well, multiple state championships as a swimmer. And she graduated high school and said, I don't swim anymore. I'm tired of swimming. She switched over to rowing, which was my sport and also her mom's sport, picked it up, and 2 years later won her first world championship. 2 years into a sport. So she started off as a pretty good athlete.
Right. Great, solid aerobic base.
And had the athlete mindset and had everything else, but jumped right into it and was into it for 2 years and ended up becoming a world champion. and a 3-time NCAA champion. And but it's kind of how we talk about burnout and what we go through. But the fact that I would get the same things when we'd be at a rowing competition. I would show up because I was a rowing coach for a number of years, but I would show up at her competitions as a dad. And going on to that same thing that we talked about with my first world record holder. When I stepped there, I was no longer, Emma's dad. I was Tim, the world champion. And I'm like, no, I'm here to support my daughter. I'm not here to talk about my glory days. I'm here to talk about, I want to see my daughter race and I want to see her win. And I think that's really cool. But you lose that. And that was that, I'm glad you didn't ask what was your background. I've been on podcasts, I've been on interviews. Well, what was your athletic background? I'm like, why does that matter?
Yeah.
And typically I wouldn't even answer it if they would ask me. I would say, I don't think that really matters. So I'm going to choose not to answer that.
That's, I don't know. I always, sometimes, because good coaches not necessarily are the ones who've done it best.
No.
Because everything came easy to them. So it's the ones who might not have been the top level performers who make the best coaches, because they understand the process a little bit more than the elite, because the elite things might have just come easier to them. And maybe because I was a crappy athlete. maybe that's why people's former athletic abilities don't matter, So I don't know, whatever reason, I value everything that you brought to the table today. All the wisdom you have for our guests, all the wisdom I'm leaving here with. And thank you to the audience. This was Tim Vagen. Oh, Tim, just let people know where they can find you, get more information about you, or do you have a social media? Do you have a website?
I used to have all that when I had my business, but basically, I keep it pretty simple. If they want to contact me, they can contact me at tvagen@highline.edu. That's HIGHLINE.edu. And if you have any questions, you have anything, there's LinkedIn. There's a couple of different things. I'm on Facebook, but most of that, the Facebook stuff's all personal. But if you have questions about training, I'm happy to talk to anybody out there. Just contact me through my Highline email. That's tvagen, VAGEN, @highline.edu. And I'll gladly answer any questions you have.
Awesome. All right, Tim, that was a great conversation, folks. That's it for today, and we'll see you next week. Thank you for listening. Thanks for listening to the Norris Sports Performance Podcast. Be sure to hit the like and subscribe button, as well as checking out the show notes for more information on our guests. You can find us on Instagram at Norris Sports Performance. Until next time, I'm your host, Judah Boulay, reminding you to train smart and recover smarter.